Settle Godfrey Junior was a lieutenant in the 7th Cavalry Regiment of the United States Army during the American Indian Wars. He is best known for his pivotal role and eyewitness account of the Battle of Little Bighorn, also known as Custer's Last Stand, which took place on June 25, 1876. Godfrey was a member of the regiment's command staff and played a key role in leading a detachment of troops to safety during the battle. He witnessed the fighting and the eventual defeat of Lieutenant Colonel George Armstrong Custer's forces and later wrote a detailed account of his experiences. Godfrey's account provides valuable insights into the events of that day and is considered one of the most important and reliable eyewitness accounts of the Battle of Little Bighorn. But before we begin, be sure to like and subscribe to our channel to support our community. On the 16th day of April, 1876, while stationed at Macomb City, Missouri, I received directives to present my troop, K, of the 7th Cavalry, unto the commanding general of the Department of Dakota, situated in St. Paul, Minnesota. At this juncture, a contingent of 25 recruits, fresh from civilian life, joined our ranks, swelling the numbers of our troop. We were subsequently ordered to proceed to Fort Abraham Lincoln, Dakota, where the Yellowstone expedition was being marshaled with all due haste. This grand expedition, a formidable force to be reckoned with, comprised the 7th United States Cavalry, led by the indefatigable General George Armstrong Custer, numbering 28 officers and 700 men, 2 companies of the 17th United States Infantry, and 1 company of the 6th United States Infantry, totaling 8 officers and 135 men, a platoon of Gatling guns, consisting of 2 officers and 32 men, attached to the 20th United States Infantry, and 40 Indian Scouts, skilled in the ways of the wilderness. Brigadier General Alfred H. Terry, commander of the department, assumed command of the expeditionary forces, bringing with him his staff, who arrived several days prior to our departure. Their presence served to underscore the gravity and importance of our mission. On the 17th day of May, at 4:30 in the morning, the general signal was sounded, a clarion call to action. Tents were struck, and camp was broken with all due haste. Wagons were packed and dispatched to the quartermaster with expedition, and by 6 o'clock, the wagon train was en route, escorted by the infantry, who marched with purpose and precision. By 7 o'clock, the 7th Cavalry was arrayed in column of platoons upon the parade ground of Fort Lincoln, a spectacle to behold. At the forefront, the band played Gary Owen, the 7th's battle tune, first employed during the charge at Washita, its stirring melody evoking memories of past glories. The column halted and dismounted just beyond the garrison, whereupon officers and married men were permitted to depart the ranks to bid farewell to their families, a poignant moment indeed. General Terry, cognizant of the ladies' trepidation, had assented to this demonstration to allay their fears and reassure them, by our formidable appearance, of our ability to contend with any adversary we might encounter. Few spectators gathered to behold the spectacle, yet many tear-filled eyes beheld us from latticed windows, a testament to the anxiety that gripped the hearts of those we left behind. During this halt, the wagon train was assembled on the plateau west of the post, and formed in column of 4s with precision. When it commenced its journey, the assembly signal was sounded, and absentees hastened to join their respective commands. The signals, "Mount" and "Forward," were subsequently sounded, and the regiment marched away with purpose, the band playing "The Girl I Left Behind Me," a melody that stirred the hearts of all who heard it. The 7th Cavalry was divided into 2 columns, designated right and left wings, commanded by Major Marcus Reno and Captain Frederick Benteen, respectively. Each wing was subdivided into 2 battalions of 3 troops each, a formation that facilitated the efficient execution of our mission. After the first day, the following order of march became habitual. 1 battalion assumed the role of advance guard, 1 served as rear guard, and 1 marched on each flank of the train, thereby ensuring our safety and security. General Custer, accompanied by 1 troop of the advance guard, would proceed ahead to select the most advantageous route for the train and designate the camping places at the end of each day's march. The other 2 troops of the advance guard reported to headquarters for pioneer or fatigue duty, tasked with building bridges and creek crossings, thereby facilitating our progress. The rear guard brought up the rear, rendering assistance to any wagon that became stalled in the mire. The battalions on the flanks were kept within 500 yards of the trail, and were cautioned against advancing more than half a mile ahead or falling behind the train, lest they become dismounted unnecessarily. Our march was conducted with military precision. One troop marched until approximately half a mile in advance of the train, whereupon it dismounted, allowing the horses to graze until the train had passed and was about half a mile in advance, at which point the troop resumed its march. Each of the other two troops conducted their march in a similar manner, ensuring that two troops on each flank marched alongside the train at all times. If the terrain was particularly treacherous, a half-dozen flankers were dispatched to guard against surprise, regulating their march to keep abreast of their respective troops. The pack animals and beef herd were driven alongside the train by the packers and herders, who ensured their safe passage. One wagon was assigned to each troop, transporting 5 days' rations and forage, as well as the mess kit of the troop, and the mess kit, tents, and baggage of the troop officers, in addition to 10 days' supplies for the officers' mess. The men were armed with the carbine and revolver, though none, not even the officer of the day, carried the saber. Each troop horse carried, in addition to the rider, between 80 and 90 pounds, a formidable burden that included all equipments and approximately 100 rounds of ammunition, 50 in the belt and 50 in saddlebags. The wagon train, a formidable procession of 150 wheeled vehicles, carried within it a veritable treasure trove of supplies, including 30 days' worth of forage and rations, beef excepted, and a formidable arsenal of 200 rounds of ammunition per man. The two horse wagons, procured through contractual arrangement, bore burdens of 1,500 to 2,000 pounds, a testament to their sturdy construction. The 6-mule government wagons, meanwhile, transported loads of 3,000 to 5,000 pounds, their capacity contingent upon the size and condition of the mules that drew them. The Gatling guns, those most modern of weapons, were each hauled by 4 cavalry horses deemed unfit for riding, and marched at the vanguard of the train. 2 lightweight wagons, laden with an assortment of axes, shovels, pickaxes, and sundry pine boards and scantling, sufficient for the construction of a short bridge, accompanied the pioneer troops, ever ready to facilitate the train's passage. The crossings, as they were termed, oft proved tedious and time-consuming, frequently delaying the train's progress by several hours. During these intervals, the cavalry horses were unbitted and permitted to graze, their reins held by the men, who would sleep or congregate in groups to spin yarns and indulge in a pinch of their dingy dudines. The officers, meanwhile, would collect near the crossing, observing the progress of the train and passing the time in convivial conversation and playful jests. At approximately noon, the strikers, who bore the haversacks, were summoned, and the various messes partook of their luncheon, sometimes separately, sometimes in communal fashion. Upon the opening of the haversacks, the horses would customarily cease grazing and approach their riders, their noses extended in supplication, plainly requesting a share of the hardtack. If their polite entreaties went unheeded, they would paw the ground or even strike their riders. The seasoned soldier, well versed in the ways of his equine companion, would oft willingly share his rations with his beast. The duration of our daily march, varying between 10 and 40 miles, was largely determined by the obstacles and challenges encountered, as well as the availability of essential resources such as wood, water, and grass. The prospect of securing these advantages in the vicinity of our destination would also influence the length of our journey. If, around 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon, a column of smoke was espied in the direction of our trail, a mile or 2 ahead, it was a fair indication that a campsite had been selected. The cavalry, with the exception of the rear guard, would then break away from the train and proceed directly to camp. The rear guard, meanwhile, would dispatch details to collect fuel and unpack the wagons. The adjutant would indicate to the wing commanders the general direction in which their lines or tents were to be situated, and the latter would, in turn, direct the battalion or troop commanders to their designated camping places. Typically, one flank of each line would be positioned in close proximity to the creek. The overall formation of the command assumed the shape of a parallelogram, with the wings camping on the longer sides, facing one another, and headquarters and the guard stationed at one end, nearest the creek. The wagon train would be packed to secure the opposite end, under the watchful eye of the infantry battalion. Upon arriving at their assigned places, the troops would form lines, facing inward, dismount, and unsaddle. If the weather was hot and the sun shone brightly, the men would rub the horses' backs until they were dry. The horses would then be led to water and put out to graze, secured by sidelines and lariats, under the supervision of the stable guard, comprising 1 non-commissioned officer and 3 or 6 privates. The men of the troop would then gather fuel, sometimes wood, often situated a mile or more distant from the camp. Sometimes, indeed, buffalo chips would suffice. The main guard or camp guard, typically consisting of 4 or 5 non-commissioned officers and 12 or 15 privates, would report mounted at headquarters and be directed to assume posts on prominent points overlooking the camp and surrounding countryside, ever vigilant against surprise. Each post would be manned by 1 non-commissioned officer and 3 privates. The officer of the day, in addition to his customary duties within the camp, bore responsibility for the safety and security of the cavalry herds. On occasion, the duty of safeguarding the cavalry herds was entrusted to an officer specifically designated as the officer of the herd. To preserve the grazing in the immediate vicinity of the camp for evening and nocturnal grazing, all horses were required to remain outside the camp limits until retreat. Upon the arrival of the train, the headquarters and troop wagons proceeded directly to their respective camping places. The officers' baggage and tents were unloaded with all due haste. Thereafter, the wagons were positioned near the designated location of the troop kitchen, invariably situated on that flank of the troop farthest from headquarters. The teamsters unharnessed their mules and released them to graze. The veteran stable guard reported to the troop commander for fatigue duty, tasked with erecting the officers' tents and collecting fuel for their mess. The troop officers' tents were typically situated 25 yards to the rear of the line of men's tents, facing toward them. Their cook or mess tent was placed approximately 10 or 15 yards further to the rear. The striker attended to the beds and arranged the furniture, which generally consisted of a camp stool, tin wash basins, and a looking glass. The men promptly erected their tents upon attending to their horses. The fronts of their tents were aligned along a line established by stretching a picket rope. The first sergeant's tent was positioned on that flank of the line nearest to headquarters. The horse equipments were placed on a line 3 yards in front of the tents. The men were not prohibited from utilizing their saddles as pillows. A trench was dug for the mess fire, and the surrounding grass was burned for several yards to prevent the outbreak of prairie fires. Thereafter, the cooks busied themselves preparing supper. Beef was issued shortly after the wagon train arrived, and the necessary number of beeves were butchered for the next day's issue. This was transported in the wagons. Stable call was sounded approximately an hour prior to sunset. The men of each troop were formed on the parade ground and marched to the horse herds under the guidance of the first sergeant. Each man proceeded to his own horse, removed the sidelines, and fastened them around the horse's neck. Then, he pulled the picket pin, coiled the lariat, noosed the end fastened to the head halter around the horse's muzzle, mounted, and assembled in line at a place indicated by the first sergeant. The troop was then marched to the watering place, selected with great care to avoid the boggy banks and miry beds of the prairie streams. After watering, the horses were lariated outside the vicinity of the camp. The ground directly in the rear of the troop was considered their domain and was zealously guarded against encroachment by others. Upon lariating their horses, the men retrieved their currycombs, brushes, and nose bags and proceeded to the troop wagon, where the quartermaster sergeant and farrier measured, with tin cups, the forage for each man, each scrutinizing the allotment to ensure equity. The men then attended to feeding and grooming their horses. The officer responsible for attending stables and the first sergeant superintended the grooming, meticulously examining each horse's back and feet to ensure their well-being. When a horse's back became sore due to the rider's negligence, the man was typically compelled to lead his horse until the sore had healed. Immediately following stables, the cooks announced, in a loud tone, "Supper." The men, equipped with haversack and tin cup, proceeded to the mess fire to procure their hardtack, meat, and coffee. If game had been killed, the men would engage in a bit of extra cooking themselves. The mess kits of the troop officers comprised a sheet iron cooking stove, an iron kettle, stewing, frying, baking, and dishpans, a small Dutch oven, a camp kettle, a mess chest holding tableware for 4 persons, and a small folding table. In fair weather, the table was spread in the open air, affording a pleasant setting for repast. The early portion of the meal was a matter of business, but after the substantials had been consumed, the delicacies were savored more leisurely, and time was found for convivial conversation. Following supper, the pipes were lighted, and the officers, if the weather was inclement, would retire to the leeward side of the campfire. Each man, as he took his place, would invariably poke or kick the fire, turn his back, hitch up his coat tail, and fold his hands behind him. Retreat was sounded a little after sunset, and the roll was called, serving the dual purpose of ensuring the men's presence and verifying the readiness of their equipments, for it was a rare occasion indeed that we found ourselves in proximity to any attraction that might lure the men away. In the year 1876, there existed not a single ranch west of Bismarck, Dakota, nor east of Bozeman, Montana. The stable guards commenced their tours of duty at this hour. The non-commissioned officers reported to the troop commander for instructions pertaining to the night's duties. These typically designated whether the horses were to be tied to the picket line or permitted to graze, and included special instructions for the care of sick or weak horses. At dusk, all horses were brought within the limits of the camp. The picket line was stretched over 3 wagons in front of the men's tents, or 3 posts were employed when remaining in camp for an extended period. During the evening, the men congregated about the fires, singing songs and spinning yarns until the sounding of taps. The cooks prepared breakfast, which usually consisted of hard bread, bacon, and coffee. If beans or fresh meat were to be cooked, the food was placed in the Dutch ovens or camp kettles, which were positioned in the fire trench, covered over with hot ashes and coals, and a fire was built over them. If the wind blew with great ferocity, all fires were extinguished to prevent the outbreak of prairie fires. The cooks were summoned an hour or an hour and a half prior to reveille. At the first call for reveille, usually 4:20 a.m., the stable guard awakened the occupants of each tent and the officer whose duty it was to attend the roll call. Stable call followed reveille and was superintended by an officer, occupying approximately 3/4 of an hour. 2 hours after reveille, the command would be on the march. Of course, there were incidents that occasionally relieved the monotony of our routine. Antelope were abundant, and the men were encouraged by their troop commanders to hunt, providing a welcome distraction from the monotony of their duties. General Custer, an avid sportsman, had a number of staghounds, which amused themselves and the command in their futile attempts to catch the elusive creatures. One morning, they started up a large buck near where the column was marching. Lieutenant Hare, with alacrity, followed the hounds, surpassed them, drew his revolver, and shot the buck with unerring aim. Nothing of particular interest transpired until the 27th of May, when we entered the Badlands of the Little Missouri River, a region of rugged beauty and unforgiving terrain. On the 30th, General Custer was dispatched with 4 troops to conduct a reconnaissance up the Little Missouri, a distance of approximately 20 miles. He returned the same day, having discovered no recent signs of Indian activity. On the 31st, we crossed the Little Missouri without encountering any difficulties. However, on the 1st and 2nd of June, we were compelled to remain in camp due to a snowstorm of considerable severity. We remained encamped on the Powder River for a period of 3 days, during which time General Terry departed for the Yellowstone to communicate with the supply steamer Far West, which was stationed at the mouth of the Powder River. He also proceeded up the Yellowstone to confer with General Gibbon's command, known as the Montana Column, comprising 4 troops of the 2nd Cavalry and several companies of the 7th Infantry. Prior to General Terry's departure, it was announced that the 7th Cavalry would be dispatched to scout up the Powder River, while the wagon train, escorted by the infantry, would be sent to establish a supply camp at the mouth of the Powder. Upon General Terry's return, orders were issued on the 10th for the right wing, consisting of 6 troops under the command of Major Reno, to conduct a reconnaissance up the Powder, provisioned with 12 days' rations. The left wing was instructed to relinquish all forage and rations, as well as the pack mules, with the exception of 4 allotted to each troop. Major Reno departed at 3 p.m., and the following day, the remainder of the command marched to the mouth of the Powder. My troop was assigned rearguard duties, and on occasion, we found ourselves over 3 miles in rear of the wagon train, awaiting the packers, whom we were instructing in their duties. Up to this point, we had not encountered a single Indian, nor had we observed any recent signs of their presence, with the exception of a small trail indicative of a party of agency Indians, numbering perhaps half a dozen teepees, who were en route to join the hostile camp. The buffalo had migrated westward. Other game was scarce and elusive. The indications suggested that the Indians were situated west of the Powder, and intelligence from General Gibbon placed them south of the Yellowstone. Some of the officers of the right wing, prior to their departure, expressed their conviction that we would not encounter any Indians and were optimistic that we would all return home by mid-August. Major Reno received orders to scout to the forks of the Powder, then traverse to Mispa Creek, follow it down to near its confluence with the Powder. Subsequently, cross over to Pumpkin Creek, follow it down to the Tongue River, scout up that stream, and ultimately rejoin the regiment at the mouth of the Tongue by the time his supplies were depleted, unless, in the interim, he should make a discovery that necessitated his return sooner to prepare for a pursuit. A supply depot was established at the mouth of the Powder, guarded by the infantry, where the wagon train was left. General Terry, accompanied by his staff and some supplies, embarked on the supply steamer Far West and proceeded up to the mouth of the Tongue. General Custer, with the left wing, marched to the mouth of the Tongue, where we remained until the 19th, awaiting tidings from Reno's scout. The grounds where we encamped had been occupied by the Indians during the previous winter. Miles City, Montana, was subsequently established on the site of this camp. The rudimentary shelters for their ponies, constructed from driftwood, remained standing and furnished fuel for our campfires. A number of their deceased, placed upon scaffolds or tied to tree branches, were disturbed and robbed of their trinkets. Several individuals rode about, exhibiting their trinkets with as much gusto as if they were trophies of their valor, and displayed no more concern for their desecration than if they had won them at a raffle. 10 days later, I beheld the bodies of these same individuals, dead, naked, and mutilated. On the 19th of June, tidings arrived from Major Reno, conveying the intelligence that he had discovered a substantial trail leading up the Rosebud River. The particulars of this discovery were not widely disseminated, and as a consequence, the camp was abuzz with rumors, fueling our collective anxiety and curiosity. Credulity was raised to the highest pitch, and we eagerly anticipated learning the details of Reno's findings upon joining his command. Upon reaching Reno's command, we learned that they had encountered a large trail on the Tongue River, which they had followed up the Rosebud for a distance of approximately 40 miles. The number of lodges in the abandoned villages was estimated to be around 350, based on the number of campfires remaining. The indications suggested that the trail was approximately 3 weeks old. Notably, no Indians had been sighted, nor were there any recent signs of their presence. It is unlikely that Reno's movements were known to the Indians, for on the very day he reached his farthest point up the Rosebud, the Battle of the Rosebud between General Crook's forces and the Indians was fought, with the two commands being unaware of each other's proximity, despite being merely 40 miles apart. We arrived at the mouth of the Rosebud around noon on the 21st and commenced preparations for the impending march and the anticipated battle or pursuit. Upon our arrival, Generals Terry, Gibbon, and Custer convened a conference on board the steamer Far West. It was decided that the 7th Cavalry, under General Custer's command, would follow the trail discovered by Reno. Immediately following the conference, officers' call was sounded in the 7th Cavalry camp, and upon assembling, General Custer issued our orders. We were instructed to transport, on our pack mules, 15 days' rations of hard bread, coffee, and sugar, 12 days' rations of bacon, and 50 rounds of carbine ammunition per man. Each man was to carry on his person and in his saddlebags 100 rounds of carbine and 24 rounds of pistol ammunition. Additionally, each man was to carry on his horse 12 pounds of oats. The pack mules that had been dispatched with Major Reno's command had been subjected to considerable hardship and were in a precarious state, threatening to impede the progress of the expedition. General Custer recommended that additional forage be transported on the pack mules to mitigate this issue. However, in attempting to implement this suggestion, certain troop commanders, including Captain Moylan and myself, foresaw the potential difficulties and cautioned the general that some of the mules would inevitably succumb to the strain, particularly if the extra forage were packed. He responded in an unusually emphatic manner, stating, "Well, gentlemen, you may transport whatever supplies you deem necessary. You will be held accountable for your companies. The extra forage was merely a suggestion, but bear this in mind. We shall pursue the trail for 15 days, unless we apprehend the Indians prior to the expiration of that period, regardless of the distance it may take us from our base of supplies. we may not encounter the supply steamer again." And, turning as he was about to enter his tent, he added, "You would do well to carry an extra supply of salt. We may be compelled to subsist on horse meat before this expedition is concluded." His words were taken to heart, and an additional supply of salt was indeed transported. The battalion and wing organizations were disbanded, and troop commanders were henceforth accountable solely to General Custer. As soon as it was determined that we were to embark on this perilous venture, nearly every individual took the opportunity to pen letters to their loved ones, though I dare say few were of a cheerful nature. Some officers took the precaution of drafting their last wills, while others imparted verbal instructions regarding the disposition of their personal effects and the distribution of mementos, as if they harbored a presentiment of their fate. The Sioux Indians, who never frequented an agency, instead roaming the buffalo country and camping at will, were known as the hostiles. They comprised representatives from various tribes of the Sioux Nation and served as a rendezvous for agency Indians during their annual hunts for meat and robes. Many among their number were renegade outlaws from the agencies, notorious for their arrogance and penchant for fomenting discord during their visits. Depredations had been committed against commerce en route to the Black Hills, and numerous lives had been lost, for which they were held accountable. The authorities in Washington had resolved to compel these Indians to reside at the agencies, thus precipitating the Sioux War. Major James McLaughlin, a distinguished United States Indian agent, having served at the Devil's Lake Agency, Dakota, from 1870 to 1881, and subsequently at Standing Rock Agency, Dakota, from 1881 to 1895, and presently holding the position of Inspector in the Bureau of Indian Affairs, has endeavored to ascertain an accurate estimate of the number of Indians present at the hostile camp during the battle. In his esteemed opinion, which is widely accepted with confidence by those familiar with his expertise, approximately one-third of the entire Sioux Nation, including the Northern Cheyennes and Arapahoes, were present at the battle. He estimates the number to be between 12 and 15,000. Assuming that 1 out of 4 is a conservative estimate in determining the number of warriors present, and considering that every male over 14 years of age may be regarded as a warrior in a general engagement, such as the Battle of the Little Bighorn, the minimum strength of their fighting men may be estimated at between 2,500 and 3,000. Intelligence received from General Sheridan indicated that approximately 1,800 lodges had departed from the agencies to join the hostile camp. However, this information did not reach General Terry until several days subsequent to the battle. The principal warrior chiefs of the hostile Indians were Gall, Crow King, and Black Moon of the Hunkpapa Sioux, Low Dog, Crazy Horse, and Big Road of the Ogallala Sioux, Spotted Eagle of the Sanzark Sioux, Hump of the Minneconjous, and White Bull and Little Horse of the Cheyennes. These individuals are credited with conducting the battle, although Gall, Crow King, and Crazy Horse were the dominant leaders. Sitting Bull, a Hunkpapa Sioux Indian, held the position of chief of the hostile camp, with approximately 60 lodges of devoted followers. As the host of the hostiles, he received and entertained visitors who presented him with gifts, enabling him to reciprocate with generosity. In this manner, he garnered recognition as the chief of the hostile camp, which was commonly referred to as Sitting Bull's camp or outfit. Sitting Bull was a sturdy, muscular individual, approximately 5 feet 8 inches in stature, and 42 years of age at the time of the Battle of the Little Bighorn. He wielded authority as the autocrat of the camp, primarily due to his position as host. In council, his views carried significant weight, as he was renowned as a great medicine man. Although he was a chief, he was not a warrior chief, and his role in war councils was limited to a voice and vote equivalent to that of any other chief. Prior to the battle, he had made medicine and predicted that the soldiers would attack and be defeated. During the battle, he remained in the village making medicine, as was his custom in times of danger. The agency Indians regarded him as a coward and a liar, a man with a big head and a little heart. Chief Gall, born circa 1840 to Hunkpapa parents, never resided at the agencies until Sitting Bull's surrender in 1881, although he occasionally visited as a guest. At the age of 25, Gall was renowned for his bravery and daring. His cunning and audacity were so exceptional that in 1866, the military authorities offered a reward for his capture, dead or alive, in connection with an outrage that was believed to be the work of no other Indian. However, Gall was innocent of the crime. Aware of the price on his head, he avoided the military. During a visit to friends at the Fort Berthold Agency, his presence was reported to the commanding officer at Fort Stevenson, prompting a detachment to be sent to arrest him. As the soldiers entered the teepee, Gall dropped to his belly and pushed himself backward under the teepee, where he was bayoneted through the body by a soldier. Believing him to be dead, the soldiers reported as much to their commander and were dispatched to retrieve his body. To their astonishment, Gall had regained consciousness and escaped. The soldiers searched the surrounding woods but failed to find him. Gall returned to his people, vowing vengeance, which he exacted through numerous raids and battles. He harassed military posts, attacking unsuspecting individuals even at the gates of the stockade. He also raided settlements, targeted Black Hill stages and freighters, and shadowed the Bozeman expedition in 1874, compelling them to remain vigilant for days. A testament to this encounter remains visible to this day: an entrenchment on the divide between the Rosebud and Little Bighorn at the head of Thompson Creek. In 1872, Chief Gall led his braves in a surprise raid on the 2nd Cavalry at Baker's Battlefield on the Yellowstone, which nearly proved disastrous due to its unexpected nature, as Indians rarely launched night attacks. On August 4, 1873, General Custer's troops had encamped on the north bank of the Yellowstone, above Fort Keogh, awaiting the main command under General Stanley. Gall seized this opportunity to launch a surprise attack, positioning his warriors to within 300 yards before an alarm sounded, prompting a lively battle that continued until reinforcements arrived from the main command, who had observed the firing from a distance. A week later, Gall attacked the 7th Cavalry at the head of Peace Bottom, where he rode fearlessly, dressed in scarlet and war bonnet, amidst a hail of bullets, yet emerged unscathed. Gall's prowess as a war chief was further demonstrated at Custer's last battle. In 1877, he accompanied Sitting Bull to Canada, and in 1881, surrendered at Poplar Creek, Montana. His band was subsequently relocated to Standing Rock Agency in 1882 via steamboat. Upon arrival, Gall, resplendent in war paint and regalia, dramatically disembarked, ignoring his mother's emotional entreaties. Later, he reconciled himself to agency life, becoming a wise and conservative leader who supported Agent Major James McLaughlin's efforts to improve the lives of his people. In grand councils, Gall emerged as the most influential chief, advocating for the just rights of his people. He passed away at Oak Creek, near Standing Rock Agency, in 1895. His imposing features drew comparisons to notable figures such as Webster, Henry Ward Beecher, and Bishop Newman. Gall possessed exceptional natural ability, force of character, and common sense. General Custer received written instructions, dated June 22, 1876, at the mouth of Rosebud River, Montana Territory, which read, Lieutenant Colonel Custer, 7th Cavalry, the Brigadier General commanding directs that, upon readiness of your regiment, you shall proceed up the Rosebud in pursuit of the Indians whose trail was discovered by Major Reno a few days prior. As it is impossible to provide definitive instructions for this movement, and even if it were possible, the department commander has utmost confidence in your zeal, energy, and ability, and thus does not wish to impose precise orders that might hinder your actions when nearing the enemy. He shall, however, convey his views on your intended course of action and desires that you conform to them unless you deem it necessary to depart from them. He suggests that you proceed up the Rosebud until you ascertain the direction of the aforementioned trail. Should it lead towards the Little Horn, as appears likely, he recommends that you continue southward, possibly as far as the headwaters of the Tongue, then turn towards the Little Horn, constantly feeling to your left to prevent the Indians' escape to the south or southeast by passing around your left flank. Colonel Gibbon's column is presently en route to the mouth of the Bighorn. Upon reaching that point, it will cross the Yellowstone and advance up to at least the forks of the Big and Little Horns. Naturally, its future movements will be dictated by circumstances as they arise, but it is hoped that the Indians, if located on the Little Horn, will be nearly encircled by the two columns, rendering their escape impossible. The department commander requests that, en route up the Rosebud, you thoroughly examine the upper part of Tulloch's Creek and attempt to dispatch a scout to Colonel Gibbon's column with information regarding your findings. The lower part of the creek will be examined by a detachment from Colonel Gibbon's command. The supply steamer will be navigated up the Bighorn as far as the Forks, if the river permits. The department commander, who will accompany Colonel Gibbon's column, desires that you report to him there no later than the expiration of your troops' rations, unless you receive further orders in the interim. Very respectfully, your obedient servant, E.W. Smith, Captain, 18th Infantry, Acting Assistant Adjutant General. I hope this first-hand account gives you a new perspective on the Battle of Little Bighorn and the Great Sioux War of 1876. Stay tuned for more videos like this. I hope to bring you more first-hand accounts of different battles, so have a great day, and I'll see you next time.